Before I turn it over to Brother Daniel Childs, his topic is the selflessness of Jesus. And in preparation for his remarks, he has asked that we read from the book of Matthew, chapter 14, and I'll be reading verses 6 through 23. If you open your Bibles, please. Reading from Matthew chapter 14, beginning at verse 6. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company and pleased Herod, so that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." And the king was sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. And when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. At this point, I'd like to ask for your quiet and careful attention as our brother Daniel Childs speaks to us on the topic, the selflessness of Jesus.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. It's good to see everybody here. I hope that we get every inch of snow that they're promising us, and I hope that everybody's safe and warm at home. This morning we'll be speaking on the selflessness of Jesus, both as an exhortation to us and an example. When it is time for us to focus on the memorial table, I find myself often meditating on the selflessness of Jesus. It's the cornerstone of his character and something that has the most impact on me personally. I find myself constantly going back to one of Christ's last prayers in John 17, when trying to either center myself or direct my thoughts for pretty much any exhortation. The focus that this man had on those around him hours before his death floors me. As one example, probably 15 years ago, Todd Lindenblad was giving a class, and he gave an example of when he was getting some dental work done, and afterwards he was, with his mother in the car, and he was asking about her day and, how she was doing. And then as an aside, he kind of admitted that, his focus wasn't really on how she was doing, but it was really on his discomfort and his pain and stuff. And he mentioned that this is essentially a polar opposite of how Jesus is to us. Regardless of his situation, circumstance, comfort level, he was always truly focused on those around him. And we see this time and time again. It is easy for us to fall into a place where when we are in need or when we're in discomfort, we only focus on ourselves. Christ, however, regardless of his circumstance or comfort level, he always acts and speaks to the benefit of those that are around him. And this is probably exemplified most in his moments before death when he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." After meditating more on Christ's selflessness and what it means to me, I thought it could be material for a good exhortation. Another item, also Brother Colton gave an exhortation a few weeks ago in Arlington titled Protecting the Vulnerable. I also found that immensely helpful in preparing remarks for today. So this morning, we're going to focus on the selflessness of Christ, both as an example, but also the exhortational implications that his character holds with it. We're going to look at some of Christ's miracles, both the beneficiaries of these miracles, the circumstances in which these miracles were performed, and the implications that this has for our walk following him. We'll also take a look at Christ's perspective and his foresight in his actions here. And then we will close with Christ's prayer in John 17. So to start, let's look at the healing of the man by the pool. Let's all turn to John 5, and we'll read verses 1 through 18 here. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there, and he knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The man answered him, "Sir, I have no one else to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, and I'm going to step down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up and take your bed and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and he walked. Now that day was the Sabbath, so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" They asked him, "Who was this man that said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. As we know, Christ often chooses to focus on the physically or mentally broken, the outcasts, the pariahs, the sick, and the needy. And that's what we see here in this example. He was drawn to this place, a place where masses of these people gathered in hope of being healed. He healed an individual who had been broken for almost 40 years, so broken that he could not get himself into the pool in hopes of being healed. Jesus also knew that doing this on the Sabbath, even though it was a miracle, would invite persecution from the Pharisees. This, again, is not an anomaly, as what we should expect from Christ. Multiple times he was almost stoned for his miracles and his sayings, but he persevered regardless. And if we consider again the reading that we did before the exhortation, Jesus feeding the 5,000, just skipping to verse 12 of chapter 14 in Matthew. And his disciples came and took the body and buried John, and they went and told Jesus. Now Jesus heard this, and he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is over now. Send the crowds away to the villages to buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away, for you give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We only have 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here." And he ordered the crowds to sit down in the grass and take the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He looked up to heaven and said a blessing. He broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Immediately he made the disciples get into a boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, then he went up to a mountain by himself to pray. At this time we see Jesus, he loses one of his relatives, someone that was so close to him, and clearly a spiritual pillar in his life. He seeks a place to be alone, to grieve. He is probably also exhausted at this point. We see his disciples trying to intercede to give him this rest, to give him this solace. But when he sees the crowd, he not only has compassion on them, he draws nigh to them and he heals them. And then later in the day, as evening comes, he again does not turn them away, as the disciples again try to do, but miraculously provides food for this massive number of people. Jesus uses his God-given power to feed the hungry and provide for those who seek him. Let us look at another example in John chapter 9, verses 1 through 12. We'll look at the healing of the blind man. As he passed by, he saw a blind man from birth. And the disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. He anointed the man's eyes with mud and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back again, seeing the neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, it is he. Others said, no, but he is like him. And he kept saying, I am the man. So they said to him, how are your eyes now opened? He answered, this man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. And they said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. Again, we see Jesus choosing somebody from society that society would not revere, a man who begged on the streets, who was blind from birth. Jesus healed this man, stating that the works of God might be displayed in him. Interestingly enough, this is the same language that he used around the time of Lazarus, when he resurrected him, representing that, the works of God or the power of God is to do this healing, to do this, these good works for those who are in need. Continuing on the blind man, jumping to verse 30, and the blind man has his retort to the Pharisees. Why, this is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, you were born in utter sin, and you would teach us? And they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. He said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, are we also blind? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, we see, your guilt remains. Jesus again was drawn to this man after he was cast out. Those around him saw his miracles, but could not see God in them. Was it because of the methods or the timing, or because who Jesus chose? Or is it because they chose not to see? Jesus has a focus on the broken, the needy, the underprivileged of society. This mirrors the sentiment that we read about God manifesting through the Psalms. Just to mention a few times, Psalm 34:18, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 147, verse 3, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. And also in Psalm 51, verse 17, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. God, like Jesus, is not impressed with status, stature, wealth, or privilege. Who are we drawn to when we seek to help those, when we seek to preach? And who are we comfortable communing with? Jesus was comfortable with quite a variety of individuals. We see this illustrated in the individuals who suffered these ailments for almost all their lives. Likewise, in the woman in the crowd who had suffered for 12 years. These individuals suffered something truly arduous that is hard to imagine. Excuse me, I thought I was going to sneeze. And to read on that, let's go to Mark 5, verses 24 through 34. A great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew much worse. She'd heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus perceived that in himself the power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see these crowds pressing around you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Jesus again chooses an outcast, someone vulnerable. This woman was without money, had suffered through many doctors, and only grew worse. She was also desperate and in fear that she snuck through, and so in fear that she snuck through and was trembling after and collapsed before Jesus. Because of this woman's ailment, she would have been considered unclean, living in a state of uncleanness, which would have brought her upon into social and religious isolation. Jesus, however, was unfazed by any of that, and only surprised that the power had gone out from her and she was healed. And he responded kindly in turn, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." We are living in a very poignant time where simple actions and choices have a great potential to affect those around us, neutrally at best or possibly very negative. As we see in Jesus an example to heal and take care of those around us, that is what we should do. As we continue in this thought of what Jesus in turn expects from us, likewise in his example, let's turn to Matthew 25, and we'll read verses 31 through 46 here. "When the Son of Man comes in glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and will separate people from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you at the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you as a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick in prison and visit you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me.' Then he will say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for you, for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they also will answer, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you?' Then he will say to them, saying, 'Truly, I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.' And these will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." We see the emphasis Christ puts on the caretaking of those around us by this being illustrated at the core of the judgment seat here. The righteous here are those who were caretakers to those around them, similar to the phrasing, "So the works of God should be made manifest in them," that we saw after some of these miracles. We must make sure to put others' well-being over our own personal comfort or freedoms. To paraphrase some of what our dear brother and friend Colton said in his exhortation, "Foxes have no holes, birds have no nests. The Son of Man doesn't have a home. He was constantly made to avoid areas where people wanted to harm him, constantly on the move, looking for more people to help." If ever we find ourselves choosing comfort over compassion, this is not the way of Jesus. Throughout his life, he embraced human vulnerability and vulnerable humans. We should count it all joy to give up some earthly comforts to identify with and protect the most vulnerable of our society. Jesus always chose the well-being of others over his own comfort. To consider the selflessness of Jesus as an exhortation, I would like us to turn to Romans. Let's look at Romans chapter 5, verses 1 through 8 here. "Therefore, since we've been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through him we have obtained access by faith into his grace, which we stand, and rejoice in the hope of the glory of God. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, who has been given to us. For while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God showed his love for us in that while we were sinners, still sinners, Christ died for us. All the hope that we have is through Christ and his selfless action, his love for us. Again, here in this passage, we see the rejoicing in suffering, which produces endurance, character, and in turn, hope. While we are still sinners, or still vulnerable, while we are still imperfect or brokenhearted, Christ died for us, giving us this hope. And God's love has been poured into our hearts through this. For our last reading, I'd like us to go through John 17, and we'll focus on verses 9 through 23 out of this prayer here. This is, as we know, one of the last prayers of Jesus, moments before he goes into the garden, where he knows he will be betrayed. I'm starting at verse 9. I am praying for them. I'm not praying for the world, but those whom you have given me. For they are yours. All mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I am glorified in them. And I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, keep them in your name, which you have given me, that they may be one, even as we are one. Jesus' thoughts at this time were entirely focused on his dear brothers that he had been teaching and traveling with over the past few years and their relationship to God's plan. He knows what is coming next, and he is still so focused on his love for his disciples and his time that he has spent with them. Continuing, while I was with them, I kept them in your name, which you have given me. I've guarded them, and not one of them has been lost except the son of destruction. But now I am coming to you, and these things I speak in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled in themselves. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of this world, just as I am not of this world. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in truth, and your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. And for their sake I consecrate myself, that they also may be sanctified in truth. There are joys despite the trials that we may go through, like Jesus. Jesus likewise does not pray that they be removed from these tribulations, but they persevere, and God be with them through these trials. And then he goes on, I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they may be all one, as you, Father, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they may also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. This is a prayer that Jesus was also giving for us now. We have followed his words that were passed down through Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and others who wrote the scriptures that we read. Our precious hope is that we may be one with them in the kingdom through the grace of our God and Father. Going on. The glory that you have given me, and I have given to them, that they may be one even as we are one, I and them, and you and me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you loved me. It is our hope to be an example to those in the world around us, following the perfect example of Christ in that selflessness. And now finishing up. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to see the glory that you have given me because you loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, even though the world does not know you, I know you, and these know that you have sent me. I made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known, that love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. So now let us be strong and let our hearts take courage, all of us who wait for the Lord. Thank you.